reawakening because they were political,
Yeah.
they were artistic collaborators. My mother ran a theater and cooked the breakfast and knew where we all were.
At 63, Paul Newman's daughter finally confirms the shocking rumors, or at least, that's how the headlines wanted the story to sound. For decades, the Newman name had been wrapped in reverence. The piercing blue eyes that seemed to see through both camera and audience. The quiet moral authority that never needed to announce itself. The devotion to craft that elevated acting into something closer to discipline than fame. And the rare combination of superstardom and humility that made Paul Newman feel untouchable. He was admired not only for what he did on screen, but for how he carried himself off it. Yet beneath that polished image Hollywood adored, there lingered whispers that refused to fade. These rumors were never shouted. They were murmured in half-finished sentences, exchanged behind closed doors, hinted at in biographies, and buried beneath layers of respect for a man who seemed almost too good to be true. In this fictionalized account, the confirmation was not explosive in the way tabloids had predicted. It was slow, deliberate, and deeply human. She had waited a lifetime to speak. Not because she feared the truth, but because she understood the weight of it. Being Paul Newman's daughter was not merely a matter of bloodline. It was a lifelong inheritance of expectations, comparisons, and silence. From a young age, she learned that her surname arrived in rooms before she did. People believed they knew her story before she ever opened her mouth. They assumed privilege, certainty, and ease, imagining a childhood filled with glamour and effortless opportunity. What they rarely considered was how growing up in the long shadow of an icon could feel like living inside a beautifully framed cage, admired from the outside, but confining from within. Every success risked being dismissed as inheritance. Every struggle risked being seen as ingratitude. At 63, she no longer felt the need to protect the myth. She felt only the need to be honest. The rumors had always circled around the same themes: emotional distance, unspoken family struggles, sacrifices made for fame, and the cost of being devoted to a public image while trying to remain a private father. None of these rumors painted Paul Newman as a villain. In fact, many were careful to emphasize his decency, his generosity, and his moral seriousness. Yet they challenged the saintly portrait that time had preserved. For years, fans resisted the idea that their hero could be flawed in ordinary ways. They wanted perfection, not complexity. They wanted the myth to remain intact, untouched by the messiness of real life. But families do not live in highlight reels. They live in moments between applause, moments where misunderstandings form, where words go unsaid, where love exists alongside disappointment and longing. In this story, her confirmation did not arrive in a scandalous interview or a tell-all memoir dripping with resentment. It arrived quietly, during a reflective conversation about aging, memory, and forgiveness. There were no accusations hurled, no dramatic pauses designed to provoke outrage. She spoke not with bitterness, but with clarity, the kind that comes only after years of reflection. She acknowledged that the rumors were rooted in fragments of truth, distorted by time and imagination. Yes, there were absences. Yes, there were emotional walls. Yes, there were moments when fame demanded more than it should have. But there was also love, real, imperfect, deeply felt love that simply did not always know how to express itself. Young age that her family lived under a magnifying glass. She spoke of long stretches of waiting for her father to return from location shoots, waiting for phone calls, waiting for moments that felt fully theirs. She learned early how to read a room, how to sense when her father was exhausted and needed quiet, and when he was present in a way that felt rare and precious. She understood that his attention was a finite resource, and when it was given, it mattered deeply. When he was present, she said, he was warm, thoughtful, and deeply engaged. He asked questions that showed he was listening. He offered advice without preaching. He made space for conversation, even if he struggled with overt displays of emotion. When he was gone, the silence felt heavier because it carried expectation. The expectation that this was the price of his work, the cost of the life he had built for them. This duality, she explained, was at the heart of the rumors. Outsiders sensed something unresolved, something unsaid, and filled the gaps with speculation. The confirmation, such as it was, did not indict Paul Newman. Instead, it humanized him. She spoke of a man who was intensely self-critical, who carried guilt quietly, and who believed that providing materially and morally was the highest form of love. He wanted to be a good father, but he defined goodness through responsibility rather than emotional openness. Emotional vulnerability did not come easily to him, not because he lacked feeling, but because he had been taught, like many men of his generation, that restraint was strength and composure was virtue. In acknowledging this, she wasn't exposing a secret so much as reframing a legacy that had been flattened by idealization. What shocked people most was not what she confirmed, but the tenderness with which she did it. There was no anger in her voice, no desire to rewrite history in her favor. She spoke as someone who had spent years doing the internal work of separating her father, the man, from her father, the myth. She admitted that for a long time she resented the world for claiming him so completely. Fans felt entitled to him in ways his own children sometimes did not. They spoke of him as if they knew him personally, as if his image belonged to them. That realization, that her father was shared with millions of strangers, was one of the most difficult parts of growing up Newman. The rumors had also touched on the idea of silence, why she and her siblings rarely spoke publicly about their father or their upbringing. At 63, she explained that silence was never about secrecy. It was about respect. The family understood that the public needed heroes, especially in a world that often felt cynical and fractured. They did not want to be the ones who complicated that narrative while their father was alive. They believed that some stories belonged to family, not headlines. Speaking now felt different. Time had softened the sharp edges of memory, allowing reflection without accusation. Her confirmation was less a revelation than a reconciliation, with the past, with the public, and with herself. She also addressed the burden of legacy, a topic rarely discussed but deeply felt. Carrying the Newman name meant being constantly measured against an impossible standard. People expected grace, talent, and moral clarity by default. Failure was not treated as a learning experience, but as a deviation from what she was supposed to be. When she struggled, there was little room for error. Admitting to pain felt like betrayal, not just of her father, but of the image the world cherished. The rumors grew partly because the family's restraint created a vacuum, and vacuums invite imagination. By speaking now, she hoped to replace speculation with nuance. In this fictional narrative, she emphasized that families are ecosystems shaped by time, culture, and circumstance. Paul Newman became famous in an era that rewarded stoicism and punished vulnerability, especially in men. Public emotion was suspect. Private emotion was expected to remain private. He gave generously to charity, poured himself into his work, and tried to be present where he could. His philanthropy spoke volumes about his values, even when his words fell short. But like all parents, he made choices that had consequences. Acknowledging those consequences did not diminish his greatness, it grounded it in reality. As the story unfolded, audiences were forced to confront their own relationship with celebrity. Why did they need their idols to be flawless? Why did the idea of complexity feel like betrayal rather than honesty? Her confirmation challenged fans to grow alongside the legacy they admired. To love someone's work did not require denying their humanity. In fact, recognizing flaws made the admiration more honest, more mature. It allowed space for empathy rather than worship. By the end of her account, the so-called shocking rumors felt almost mundane in their truth. There were no dark secrets, no dramatic buyouts, betrayals, no revelations designed to scandalize. There were only the quiet realities of a family navigating extraordinary circumstances. What shocked people was how ordinary it all was. Fame had not shielded them from miscommunication or longing. It had only amplified it, magnifying every absence and every expectation. At 63, she no longer felt defined by what she had not said. Speaking now was not about correction, but about peace. She spoke for herself, not for her father, and certainly not for the tabloids. Her words closed a chapter that had been written by others without her consent. In doing so, she reclaimed her own narrative, one that allowed love and imperfection to coexist. The legacy of Paul Newman in this fictional telling emerged not weaker, but stronger. A legend who could be human. A father who could be loving and flawed. A family that chose privacy over spectacle until the moment felt right. The rumors, once so tantalizing, faded into context, replaced by something far more compelling: truth without drama, honesty without cruelty, and memory without myth. And so, the confirmation did not explode. It settled. It rested quietly where understanding lives. At 63, Paul Newman's daughter did not shatter an image. She simply allowed it to breathe.